Hey y'all, it's Heel Heat time.
Hi everybody and welcome to Heel Heat. My name is George Coles and this is a Heel Heat Top 10. The topic of the Top 10 this week, Top 10 Wrestlers to Never Have a WrestleMania Match. Let's jump right into it. Number 10, Samoa Joe. Probably over the last 10 years or so, one of the most hyped up wrestlers in wrestling, one of the best wrestlers, whether it be through Ring of Honor or TNA. The one guy that really dominated both organizations, could have been a guy that could have been a major player in WWE and still has the time to be. Just for whatever reason, the cards haven't lined up and he hasn't went as of yet. But a guy that probably, if this was written a little bit later, he would probably move up, because I still think there's time for him to get a WrestleMania match in. But unfortunately he hasn't as of yet. Now coming off of that, our number 9 guy. We got the loose cannon, Flying Brian Pillman. He was signed to WWE for a little over a year, unfortunately died prematurely. I think he would have eventually had a WrestleMania match, had an amazing feud going with Goldust at the time of his death, had a built-in rivalry with Stone Cold Steve Austin that they could always go back to. He was someone that they could have banked on. I think he would have been a huge part of the Attitude Era if he stayed alive through it. He would have been thought of along the lines of Austin and The Rock and Triple H, somewhere in that upper echelon of the talent. He was handmade and perfectly fit for that era. Unfortunately, he died out a little bit young for it. Kind of like a Jimi Hendrix died out young. Kind of like a Kurt Cobain died out young. People that are so talented, but you only get a flash of their brilliance and then they fade away. Now the next guy probably is more his own fault than anybody else's that he hasn't had a WrestleMania match. Our number 8 guy, the franchise Shane Douglas. He had a couple little stints in the WWE, basically pissed off anybody that he could, has talked bad about Shawn Michaels, Vince McMahon, Ric Flair, and anybody else he's come across. Wonderful wrestler, great talker. Part of the reason why we love him as a talker is those exact reasons, as he tells his opinions on these people when other wrestlers keep it quiet. However, it's bit him in the ass. He's never really had the opportunity to be the big dog in the big company. Even when he was in WCW, they never really let him be the big dog in WCW. Now, for a while, he was the big dog in ECW, and a really revolutionary talent there. Unfortunately, he never got a chance to apply his skills on the biggest stage of them all. Now, next up, our number 7 guy, much like our number 10 guy, is a TNA mainstay, someone that might still get his chance to be a WrestleMania wrestler, and that's Robert Roode, Bobby Roode. One of the real highlights of TNA, one of their best wrestlers they have. Whether it be part of Beer Money, whether it be part of the Canadian team, whether it be on his solo run, his, at this point, legendary World Championship run, Bobby Roode is someone that commands interest and commands you to watch the television screen. He's a guy, no pun intended, has that it factor, and someone that if he was taken by the WWE could blow up and become easily the next Rick Rude. Could be, no pun intended there either, could be someone of that level of a heel where he's one of the main heels, much like a Ted DiBiase, a Ric Flair style. He has that style where he's just an old school heel that isn't afraid not to be cool, if you understand what I mean by that. Too many heels still want to be cool and still want the fans to buy their merchandise, where Bobby Roode isn't afraid to incite the fans and get them to turn on him. Now, coming off of that, our number 6 entrance is actually a tag team. Very surprised as I am that they never had in any incarnation the Midnight Express, whether it be Dennis Condrey and and Bobby Eaton or Stan Lane and Bobby Eaton. Neither version of the team ever appeared at WrestleMania. Really sad because from the 80s to the early 90s, one of the true innovative tag teams in wrestling, one of the great tag teams in the history of wrestling, never got their chance to shine on the greatest stage. They did work some Great American Bashes, some Starcades, which at the time were the NWA/WCW equivalent of WrestleMania, but still, WrestleMania has always had just a notch above everything else. Even Starcade might have been 1A, but WrestleMania was number 1. There's a reason why it's called the grandest stage. It's because this is where the big time players come to play, and one of the great tag teams of all time never having their opportunity to do so on that stage is really kind of depressing, to be honest with you. Who wouldn't have loved to see a Midnight Express match against Demolition, against the Rockers, against Sheik and Volkov? I mean, you had so many great tag teams in the WWE in the time frame that they would have matched up perfectly with. The Hart Foundation versus the Midnight Express would have tore the roof off the building. The British Bulldogs versus the Midnight Express. I mean, there's so many ways they could have went with them, but it just never came to be. Now, coming off of that, our number 5 guy was rumored to be bribed to do a run-in on WrestleMania 1 and ruin the show, and that is Bruiser Brody. We all know how Brody's life ended with the controversy in Puerto Rico. One of the true transcending talents that I think died a little bit before he could see how much he really influenced the next decade after his death. When you think of guys like anybody in the original ECW, whether it be Sandman, whether it be Cactus Jack, Mick Foley, same guy, Raven, a lot of them owe their style in the hardcore to Bruiser Brody. One of the true innovators and pioneers for hardcore wrestling. One of the real wild men of the 70s and 80s. He could have had an amazing feud. If you would have brought him in as a Hulk Hogan foe, that would have been awesome. Or even the Ultimate Warrior. Imagine a match with the kinetic energy of the Ultimate Warrior versus the manic energy of Bruiser Brody. It would have been amazing. Bruiser Brody versus Randy Savage, they would have had a bloodbath, and it would have been great. It would have been very violent and very interesting television to watch, or pay-per-view to watch, if you will. But Bruiser Brody, he's a guy that doesn't. A lot of people know the name. A lot of people have heard of him. He doesn't quite get the respect that he should, and it's a shame because he's really one of the true innovators. Like I said, if he would have lived 10 more years, he would have seen how much he influenced the wrestling world. Even to this day, a guy like Luke Harper draws so much from the Bruiser Brody character into his own character that it's kind of a tribute to Brody himself. Even greats like JBL have stolen, or taken, not necessarily stolen, but have been influenced by Bruiser Brody. Now, coming off of that, our number 4 guy, our third TNA mainstay, recently got fired by the company or left the company when his contract ran out, and that's AJ Styles. One of the most innovative wrestlers over the last 10, 12 years in professional wrestling. The guy that made you want to watch TNA in the first place and got you turned in. This guy could have had amazing matches, and he still can. Like I said with the other 2 guys that are still active, mostly active. I know Shane does some work, and I know the Midnight Express do as well, but they're past their prime where they're going to be used in a WrestleMania match unless they do a gimmick match again. But AJ could still be brought in. He could have been, imagine the matches, think about just this, the matches he had with Kurt Angle in TNA could have happened in WWE a couple of years before. The matches he could have had with guys like John Cena, or CM Punk, or Christian, or Edge, or the list goes on. He would have been a perfect foil for somebody like Randy Orton. Randy Orton plays very well when he's wrestling a fast-paced wrestler like Rey Mysterio or Evan Bourne or Kofi Kingston, and AJ Styles would have fit right into that mold. Him and Randy Orton could have had a historically great feud, and it could be one of the guys that could have been holding the banner for WWE over the last 5-10 years. You know, he's a guy really innovative, kind of in the mold of Rob Van Dam. I could see them, and hear me out on this because I know they're a lot different, but I could see the WWE using him like they did with Rob, where he's always a fan favorite, never really getting to the top of the ladder and, you know, getting one or two maybe gift runs, but being used as a guy to give you an exciting match on every show, if you follow what I mean. He would have been awesome in any of the Money in the Bank situations. I mean, could you imagine AJ Styles in a Money in the Bank, what he could do? Would have been off the charts. We still have time. We still might see this. Hopefully we do. But it's a possibility that we never will. Now, coming off of that, our number 3, and I meant to preface this whole top 10 by saying this. For the most part, we're keeping guys that worked in Mexico and Japan off this list. Now, I could fill out a top 10 of guys that just worked, just Japanese wrestlers that never been in Mania. I could fill out a top 10 of just Mexican wrestlers that haven't been in Mania. The thing of it is, when doing this top 10, I wanted to use people that had long runs in America, whether it be in WCW, NWA, TNA, Ring of Honor, ECW, but runs where they were using an American-based company and used, you know, for a good solid amount of time, not that they were just borrowed here and there. That's why we don't see some of the greats from Mexico and Japan on here. Also, I tried to keep it to the guys that were active in the WrestleMania years. Obviously, a guy that retired 5 years before WrestleMania wouldn't get on the WrestleMania show ever. That would be fantasy booking. But back to my point originally, our number 3 guy is the Great Muta. I mean, anything he did from his time in Florida, from his time with Gary Hart in the NWA, and his various runs throughout the WCW, the guy, to me, he is still one of my favorite wrestlers. He's one of the guys that jumped off of the screen and became almost a superhero, even in the world of superheroes. I mean, there was something that magnetized you to the Great Muta, and he didn't speak hardly ever, and if he did, he spoke in Japanese. He had the green mist, the moonsault, the aerials, the shining wizard. Everything about the Great Muta is exactly what his moniker says, great. One of the all-time great wrestlers in the history, no matter where you go. And like I said when I prefaced this, Muta had some runs in the NWA and WCW. I have no idea why Vince McMahon never tried to offer him money, or if he did, I don't know why Muta never accepted. But it would have been amazing to see the Great Muta versus Shawn Michaels, the Great Muta versus Bret the Hitman Hart, the Great Muta versus The Undertaker. I mean, there's so many ways you could have went with him, and so much you could have done. There's still, again, like a couple of these other guys, Muta is still wrestling, so there's an off chance we might see him at a WrestleMania. I doubt it at this point, but it would be amazing even to see it, even if they just put him in the Hall of Fame, which is very deserving of him. Now, coming off of that, our number 2 guy, and this is a guy I always thought watching the NWA back in the day was better fit for WWE, and that was Nikita Koloff. He had the fit with his Uncle Ivan that thrown back to the WWE champ when Ivan was the WWE champion. He had the face turn where him and Dusty were pretty much the biggest tag team in WCW or NWA at the time. Nikita was a U.S. champion. He wrestled and had wonderful feuds against everybody from Tully Blanchard to Dusty Rhodes to Magnum TA to Sting, to anybody up and down the card. I mean, Nikita Koloff was a wonderful addition to their show, and I always thought he fit more. To me, he was a WWF wrestler on a on an NWA show, and as big as he was in WCW, NWA, he could have been even bigger in WWF/WWE, what it eventually became. I don't know why the trigger was never pulled on this one, but he would have been perfect. He could have been brought in as an opponent for Hogan. Then he could have won exactly what they did with Dusty Rhodes. He could have turned when Soviet communism fell and joined up with Hogan. And that would have been just as big, if not bigger, than when him and Dusty did the same thing. Now, if you've seen our top 10s before, you know before we go to number 1, we give you a best of the rest. And this is the people that just barely missed the list. First off, Vampiro. A guy that kind of people are on the fence on. A lot of people love him, a lot of people hate him. But he draws interest. He's a guy that you watch, much like the Great Muta. Vampiro had a decent run in WCW, had an okay run in TNA, has done a lot of stuff in Juggalo Championship Wrestling, has done some things in the States. Mostly he's known for his time in Mexico, but I think that when WWE purchased WCW, he was one of the guys I really wanted them to bring over. I thought Vampiro, much like Nikita Koloff, was someone that was fit for the WWF or WWE style more than he was the WCW style. And I think that Vince McMahon would have made an even bigger star out of him. Fortunately, it never happened, probably never will. Now next on our best of the rest, another tag team, the Fabulous Freebirds. I know that they were there for a short period in the beginning of the Rock and Wrestling era, but how the Fabulous Freebirds didn't work in the WWF during the Rock and Wrestling era, which they were tailor-made for, which they would have been a wonderful addition to WrestleMania 1, WrestleMania 2, WrestleMania 3, all the way up, all the way up to when they got finished as the Freebirds. Any one of the WrestleManias during their time frame, they would have been a wonderful addition to. I don't know. I know that some feathers were ruffled. I know Michael Hayes eventually came back to the company and worked as an agent. However, they would have been perfect in that Rock and Wrestling era, especially the original few WrestleManias. And last but not least, on our best of the rest, Abdullah the Butcher. Much like I said with Bruiser Brody, a lot of the same things could be said of Abdullah. I think he would have been another guy that would have been a perfect foil for Hulk Hogan. Think about like the WrestleMania 2 cage match. You could have substituted Abdullah, and the match would have been just as good. Or he could have been a guy that wrestled the Ultimate Warrior, or the Big Boss Man, or any of the big faces of the time. But coming off of that, before I go into our number 1, if you like where we have the people, if you don't like our list, if you think we got someone up too high, someone down too low, let us know what you think. If we forgot people altogether, let us know what you think. Hit us up on our comments. We'll have a little bit of a conversation about it down there. Down where? Down there. But anyway, our number 1 guy to never wrestle at WrestleMania. I mean, this is easy. It's the one thing that me and Vince McMahon probably agree on, and that's the man called Sting. Again, much like I've said with half of these guys, I think Sting, if he would have went to the WWE, his career would have been 20 times better than it was, and he's already a legend. He's someone that's a surefire WWE Hall of Famer without ever wrestling in the WWE, even though rumors are now that he is going there, and he might even get a Mania match within the next few months at WrestleMania 30. However, at this point he hasn't, and he hasn't been booked for one. So until he does, Sting is the best wrestler to never wrestle in WrestleMania. I mean, what can you say about the guy? He came in as the NWA's Ultimate Warrior, kind of had the same trajectory. When the Ultimate Warrior fell off, Sting continued, morphed his character, became a little bit darker, added the Crow-style Sting, continued on even after WCW and became a valuable asset for TNA, one of their main stars down in that organization that's helped keep them afloat for all these years. I mean, the match that everybody wanted to see is Sting and Undertaker. People still want to see that as two 50-year-old men going at it. That speaks volumes about how great Sting really is and really was. But basically, that's all I have to say about this top 10. My name is George Coles, and this has been a Heel Heat Top 10 list.